It was just another Sunday. In the South Carolina upcountry, folks went about their normal routines.
We had on the road coming back from I was on with the rifle team. We had been through the Citadel.
I was working with the Converse Opera student group on the scenery for the next opera production they were going to do. We were on the stage at Converse College and had a radio on just to keep, something to listen to.
It was just another Sunday. Everywhere except Pearl Harbor.
We was on the quarter deck and then getting ready to go ashore for a tour patrol, and the officer deck looked up, and here was those Japanese coming in smiling at us, and the big red ball and the ugly face and one thing and another. And he said, "This is no fooling, this is an attack. The Japanese are attacking us." And they flew right over us, hit the battleships. The battleships, we were on one side of the harbor, the battleships were all on the other side of the harbor.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
On that day, lives everywhere changed forever.
I was in the 11th grade at that time, and it was on Sunday afternoon. We were listening to the radio, and the news came over that the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor. And I looked at my father, and he looked at it. We looked at each other, and he said, "What?"
When we heard the news, we were devastated, and we couldn't understand why our country allowed such a thing. What happened so that the Japanese were allowed to bomb us?
Well, nobody knew where the hell Pearl Harbor was or what it was. It didn't mean anything to us, except we knew from the tension in the voice of the announcer and the importance of the announcement that it was bad news.
I remember my mother saying, "Oh no, it's all over." It was as if this impending sense of doom had finally arrived. And what had been a very pleasant Sunday afternoon suddenly turned into a conversation of all the family members who were of an age who were likely to go.
One family immediately touched by the events at Pearl Harbor were the descendants of Vardray MacBee, one of Greenville's founding fathers. 20-year-old Navy seaman First Class Luther Kirktuck MacBee died in the initial attack, Greenville's first casualty of the war that had now been declared.
People realized that they were going to be drafted by the hundreds within a matter of weeks. And so in Greenville, for example, the Army Recruiting Office and the Navy Recruiting Office were on Main Street in City Hall, and they got orders to remain open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And people were lined up to go down and volunteer.
I knew I had to enlist and serve my country the moment I was 18.
My parents felt that I should stay at home and work in the hospital as I had been. And I told them that I just couldn't do that I had to join the Army.
Even as these life-changing decisions were made, those who remained at home began gearing up for the war effort, an effort that had really begun in the mid-1930s as Hitler rose to power in Europe. The textile mills, which had in some cases been idle during the Great Depression, began to get government orders to ship materials overseas to aid Britain. By the time the U.S. went to war with the Axis powers of Japan, Germany, and Italy, cotton prices continued to rise, and the mills were often running around the clock. Government contracts began pouring in, further increasing production. Stone manufacturing created mattress covers for the Navy that were said to be so waterproof that they could be used as flotation devices if a ship were to sink. Southern Weaving became the premier production facility for strapping, used in parachute harnesses, while Watts Mill produced the actual parachutes. And many of these mills, including Mills Mill, Woodruff Mill, Fairforest Mill, and Greenwood Mills, received Army-Navy E awards for excellence in wartime production. Change became the watchword across the region, even at local universities. Since so many college-age students were eligible for the draft, men's dormitories became nearly vacant or repurposed to house soldiers in training. Ben DeLuca, for instance, found himself moving to a women's college.
Closed down Walford briefly and sent us all to Converse. So for about 6 weeks, until I got to be 18, I was really at Converse with Converse professors and Converse students.
And things didn't change much as the war progressed.
When I went to Furman in the fall of 1944, there were 4 girls for every 1 man. The only men were there were 4 Fs and preachers.
Furman University received a contract to train glider pilots and house them in the men's dormitories there, all part of a push by the colleges and universities to aid in the war effort, while simultaneously making up for income lost by so many male students heading overseas. Already an established military institution, Clemson University served as an Army training base and provided more Army officers for the war than any other university besides West Point and Texas A&M. Presbyterian College set up a pilot's training school on their campus, while Wofford College held an officers training program for Army Air Corps cadets. Meanwhile, local government officials hoped to reap economic benefits by lobbying for a military base. Greenville secured a contract to build what would become the Greenville Army Air Base, while Spartanburg's Camp Croft had already been constructed in early 1941. Utilizing some 12,000 laborers, it was the largest single building project in area history, encompassing nearly 20,000 acres at a cost of $10.3 million. It became a premier infantry training center with some 70,000 troops moving through each year. Troops who soon moved overseas to join some of the fiercest battles of the war. In the European theater, Ernest Garrett found himself in the thick of the Battle of the Bulge.
It was awful. It was the coldest winter they ever had over there. The snow and the ice. In fact, we had a lot of people to freeze and die. As we got to Luxembourg in Belgium, they gave us a day's rest because of only coming through France to get up there. And that's the first time we were fired on with rockets. We hadn't been fired on with rockets before. And we were on this side of the river, and the river there, and over there was 8 rockets hit, one right after the other. Big holes about 10 or 12 feet wide and about 3 foot deep. And we all jumped up and started running for the tanks. And the good thing we did, because the next rounds came on this side of the river where we were.
In the Pacific Theater, Ben DeLuca participated in one of the war's bloodiest battles.
The first Japanese territory that we attacked was Iwo Jima. We could see the island. It looked like this piece of land out there in the middle of nowhere. And then we watched the Navy and Marine Air Corps just bomb it to smithereens. And the fact is that we just thought that it was over. And we stood on the rails of our assault ships and thought, oh boy, we'll go there, we'll land, we'll put the flag up, it'll be over, we'll go home. No problem. We didn't think there was anything left on Earth that could be alive. Oh my God, they bombed it to smithereens. But they forgot one little thing. The 80,000 defenders were all underground. 5.5 miles long, about 2.5 miles wide. And about 60,000 people died there in 31 days. For what? I had completely fractured jaw, ear torn off, took 47 stitches to put it back, fractured skull, arm, fractured back, almost lost my leg, it was almost amputated there on the field.
Back in Europe, Bob Lawrence flew perilous bombing raids. One of his most memorable experiences occurred before the raids even began.
At that first briefing, a guy told me, he said, there's a chaplain who'll be standing at the door if you want to speak to him. And I thought, well, I believe I'll do that. So I walked to the door, and it's the Catholic Chaplain. He was short, very Italian looking, you know, and he said nothing. He just reached out his hand, and I took out mine, and he took my hand and both of his, and just looked in my eyes. He said nothing. But it's the most meaningful conversation I ever had with anybody. I don't know why. He was there every bloody day. We didn't fly every day, but he was there every day. And I've thought since, how many years has he been over here? And how can he stand it, knowing that a lot of these guys whose hand he will shake today will not come back? But there he was. I will always remember the look that man gave when he looked right into your soul, like, and prayed for you without saying a word. It was a wonderful thing.
Back at home, upcountry residents adapted to wartime shortages while also helping to support the cost of the war by purchasing U.S. savings bonds. These ongoing war bond drives brought Hollywood stars like Betty Grable, John Payne, Jane Wyman, and Johnny McBrown to the upcountry, even as rationing became a way of life.
We also were big on recycling. Took tin cans, you would cut the lid off and flatten them and collect them and turn them in. You would turn in any pots and pans that you did not need. They were melted down. And then you would recycle tires. And any tire that you had, you tried to get it recapped.
There was not any aspect of life in the upstate that was not affected in some way by the war.
Victory gardens appeared throughout the upcountry as schools, churches, factories, and individual families attempted to supplement food shortages by growing their own produce. Communities also joined together to provide entertainment for troops stationed in the area. A children's choir from the Phyllis Wheatley Center visited soldiers at the Greenville Army Air Base. Gallivan Memorial Hall at Greenville St. Mary's Church became a popular place for soldiers to attend suppers and dances. Most churches hosted regular events for soldiers and civilians and flew veterans' flags to honor members who were in the armed services. And USOs opened across the upcountry, not just for entertainment, but also as communication centers.
You could go to the dime store, it was called in those days, and buy special printed envelopes, lightweight, that had red, white, and blue borders on them, and sometimes Victory Eagles printed on them, to write to the soldiers overseas. And not only would parents and sweethearts write, but church members, Sunday school classes would often write as well.
We were given these little V-mail letters that we would write on them. They were quite thin, and then they would photograph them and send them overseas, and they took less space in the mail bags. And of course, I wrote just as many as I could, and I thought that was a very patriotic thing to do. I have a few of them that are still left.
The soldiers who received these letters sometimes had encounters while overseas that changed their lives in very positive ways. While in England, recovering from surgery on his injured legs, Earl Hudson decided to have dinner at the Salisbury Hotel.
We're sitting there, waiting on to be called in. And here comes a whole bunch of nurses across from the room. And she was sitting on the arm of one of the sofas. And this smile hit me. And something happened with inside me that I've got to meet this girl. We began to see each other. And then about May or the first part of June, she received notification that her hospital was going to be shipped to Japan. And she said, unless I was married. And I said, well, we can handle that.
With the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God.
In some ways, in my mind, and I think in the minds of many others, Franklin Roosevelt was World War II to us. He led us, he told us, he just absolutely made the war, whatever he told us, we believed in it. I was at the Women's College, the zoo. I was going up the steps to get a friend to go to supper, and it came in over the radio that Roosevelt had died. This would have been about 5:45, and everything got quiet. So, 13th of April, 1945, I mean, we all went to the train station. I had seen Roosevelt one time in 1937 when he came through Greenville, and so this was my second time. And I quote, "President Roosevelt's body left Warm Springs today at 11:10. I heard it on the radio. Then we saw the train come through here. I have never seen anything like this."
It was fairly clear that the end of the war was imminent. After D-Day, it was simply a matter of time before Germany was going to surrender.
We were in London, when all that took place in VE Day or whatever it was in Europe, and we got so moved with the crowd, I thought I had lost her, and I had to join it. And I took these two hands and smacked about 4 people this way to get to her. Because the crowd was horrible.
It was. Well, it was a happy crowd.
It was a happy crowd, but there were people getting stomped on.
Even as the victory was celebrated, soldiers like Paul Ifstration continued their work in Europe, now finding themselves confronting firsthand the horrors of German prison camps, where millions of innocent people lost their lives.
When we got there, the Germans, they claimed they didn't have any gasoline, but they had taken gasoline and poured it on this concentration camp. It was up in Wiesbaden, and they poured gasoline on it so the people couldn't get out and set fire to it. And when we got there, you could see they were trying to come out from under the gates, and they were burned. Their hands, and you couldn't see their bodies because they were on the other side. And finally we broke the gates and went in, and they were, I guess there was about 3,000. And they had the urns ready. They were going to burn them all so we wouldn't find them, see? But they didn't get a chance to.
Despite the European victory, the war in the Pacific raged on.
We were scheduled to go to Japan, and we were massing there, and then the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. And we said, well, now we are going home.
The war had gone on for so long, and people were looking for some speedy end to the conflict, that in many places, news of the bombing simply brought a sense of relief to people, that maybe it would soon be over.
14th of August, peace. That was underlined 4 times in my diary. Tonight at 7 o'clock, President Truman announced that Japan had accepted our surrender terms. We went uptown for 2.5 hours, came home and ate, and then went back and stayed until after midnight. The noise is still going on. Everybody in Greenville went up the main street. We yelled, we hollered, we just did everything that we could.
The mill whistles were blowing nonstop. The fire bells were ringing. The church bells were ringing. It was an extraordinary event. People were dancing in the streets. It's hard to imagine the sense of relief and happiness.
Well, I want you to know, the first thing I did when I landed in America, I kissed the ground.
We went back to Walford. I went back as a sophomore. Sophomores were about 18 years old, green as grass, And here all of a sudden, this bunch of men infiltrate the campus. 21, 22, 23, all kind of battle experience. Not interested in any playful stuff, just want to get their education, get out of there.
We had this terrible feeling that life had run off and left us. We should be graduating from college and we hadn't even got into college.
I did what I had to do. And I felt like we saved I think we saved some lives.
So suddenly the world opened up to them with new possibilities, with new opportunities, but they also understood the tremendous cost that was required to preserve the way of life that they had often taken for granted. And so they entered the post-war period full of hope, full of dreams for the future, but also fully aware of what cost might be required in the future to preserve their culture.
World War II changed lives and changed the upcountry. And as veterans returned to their families, they reflected on their experiences in a new way.
I think it taught me, first of all, how insignificant I am. You know, I was just one little peon up there in the thing with half of Germany shooting at me. And all these people wanted me dead, and I didn't even know them. They didn't know what a nice boy I was. You know, you really find out you don't amount to much. If I'd have got shot down, it would have made no difference in the war or anything. I was just one little cog in a very big machine. And I think that's good to know.
The hopes and dreams of this greatest generation were forged during a Great Depression and defined by the sacrifices of war. Their contributions form an enduring legacy the upcountry will never forget.